Well, let's begin with exams, because they now dominate the English education system. And I introduced GCSEs back in the 1980s, because then about half the students left at 16, and they needed a certificate just to show what they'd achieved. When I took the predecessor, the school certificate in 1950, 93% left and only 7% stayed on. So it was very important to take a certificate away so you've got a distinction, accredited or pass. Come now, it's exactly the reverse. 93% stay on and 7% leave. So there is not a compelling need for a leaving certificate today.
I think we've come far enough and we're intelligent enough to be able to offer assessment which measures how young people and older learners are progressing, and outcome measures which actually show where they've reached and the quality of the provision as well as the achievement of the learner. And I think in doing that, we need a whole range of different ways in which we can assess that progress. We do it very well the higher up the qualifications ladder you climb. So at university, we wouldn't dream of only assessing one particular formula in terms of qualification. We wouldn't dream of doing that in terms of work-based learning, and we wouldn't dream of doing it in terms of assessing language skills. So why not use the most sensible and available methods to both assess how young people are doing in terms of their teamwork and critical skills, and at the same time be able to assess their grasp of a body of knowledge, of theory, and of scholarship.
It slightly comes back to what's the purpose of education? Because probably your assessment system should be assessing whether or not we're fulfilling the purpose of education. I think the purpose for education is probably threefold. One would be to give people the capacity to connect up to opportunities they'll want in their life. I think the second would be to enable them to be contributing members of a wider community and society they're part of. And I think a third purpose of education for me would be to give people a love of learning. That means they can continue to develop themselves right the way through their lives, and that this experience of education at the beginning of it isn't something that then puts them off for life. So in a sense, if that's the purpose of education that I've set out, you'd really be then putting in place an assessment system that checked our progress against meeting those three elements of that purpose.
I think whatever we do, and when people have been talking about, for instance, the International Baccalaureate, you really do need to skill teachers to be able to take on new methodology. It's good anyway in terms of continuing professional development. It's good in terms of stimulating and motivating staff, but it's absolutely critical if we're going to move on.
I think that's a really good point. And if effectively teachers are busting a gut on these wider skills and competencies, they're doing that, but in a sense it's out of sight, and in a way their development is really very often channeled around their ability to get children to the level they need to be in the academic subjects they're studying. I think if you ask anyone who their best teacher was they had at school, it's probably not going to be the one that was the academic master in conveying knowledge. It's going to be that other person that inspired them, that excited them. And so in a sense, I think it does partly come back to career development for teachers and personal development for teachers.
What I would like to see replacing it is 5 subjects, and then every school from 11 to 16 should have 5 subjects: English, maths, 2 science, and data skills. And then the heads and the pupils should decide which other subjects they want, which they find attractive.
We're not set up even in the short term to say, are children and young people coming out of the education system career ready? And we're not then measuring what happens afterwards, so taking any cohorts of them, so that a school would be able to get a sense of how did our children do? For universities, of course, increasingly, that's what they're under pressure to demonstrate, that final step of education leads to a job. But the reality is they're kind of being put on notice for performing on something that is the last 3 years, perhaps, of a person's education that they get in higher education, from 18, say, to 21, potentially. And it completely misses to what extent the first, 14 years, as it were, or 16 years, were ones that helped them develop those skills they need.
Well, the remit from the leader of the Labour Party to me and those who were advising was very much about skills, but I couldn't possibly approach this without an understanding of how learners learn, how we progress in the digital age, how we take from what happens in school and preschool through to post-16 and into adult life, lifelong learning. And that lifelong learning journey with a learning passport would allow for the development of skills through life, but on the basis of something that you've grasped very early, which is how to work in teams, how to use critical thinking, how to ensure that we equip young people to be able to grasp rather than to be afraid of change. And that's true of our social life, our citizenship, our democracy, as it is of the technical side of the world of work and the grasp of scholarship. So the technical and the academic should be seen as complementary, not as in any way competitive.
I think there should be, because fundamentally we are transitioning from a country that has been almost this post-war version of Britain, I would describe, that was then part of a very big talent pool called the European Union and had freedom of movement, that put great store on a very pure academic performance, and universities was shifting from that to a version of Britain that actually has to rely on its own talent pool more than ever before. And therefore, productivity is becoming a big issue. And this issue of educational inequalities has become an issue because actually people being left behind means we are self-constraining our talent pool through not developing it effectively in the education system.
If you're determined enough to do it and you believe enough in it and you're convincing enough, and I think the time has come when all those qualities have got to come out in leadership and education. And that will really make it much less political. I think the Labour Party is moving slowly to that. They're not being radical enough, in my view, at the moment. And I'm trying to speak to some of their leaders to try to persuade them to follow the Blair approach, because Blair has got the best proposal at the moment on the Labour side.
If those of us of a certain age can be thinking radically and looking to the future in the way that I see cross-party we are doing, then I think that's a challenge to younger people. It's a challenge to us to be able to demonstrate what worked well and what went badly wrong, so we have a learning experience that we can hold from the past, but also to understand, to put it bluntly, if old codgers can have the creativity and the imagination and a belief in the future, come on, the rest of you can.